Okay, so I'm going to talk about the because focus on some of the issues involving housing here and the fact that there's gentrification, and that is very true. However, I'm going to talk about the flip side of it in terms of both Seattle and Tacoma, what they've done in terms of affordable housing, because it can't be ignored. So I'm going to focus on Seattle today, and that yes, Seattle does have affordable housing. First, let me pull it back and understand kind of the history. You will find, because people talk about, oh, well, especially with respect to Tacoma, oh, well, Tacoma's a ghetto, and blah, blah, blah. There's no ghetto anywhere in the Puget Sound region. There's not, there's no such thing. Doesn't exist. And I can say that because I've been to true ghettos. I've seen them. I lived in lived in Indianapolis, traveled to Chicago often. I've been to Cleveland. I've seen places that were defined as ghetto because of and I've been to other cities where it is just block after block after block after block of houses that and buildings that are so dilapidated and people are living in those areas. I've seen tons of those. No job opportunities. The only stores that you see are liquor stores, and you will see pawn shops. You'll see stuff like that. But as far as any store that really helps people, nope. You'll see street lights that have been jacked up for decades. You see a lot of empty abandoned lots, a lot of empty abandoned stores, and we're talking for large areas. Been to Detroit too. See, the Puget Sound region has none of that. The only example that comes close was Tacoma back in the day. There was parts of Tacoma that some would argue that maybe it was crossing to that point, but still it doesn't compare to what people consider ghetto. Okay, so that's the first thing. So, no, and I've traveled throughout this entire region. Traveled throughout. There's not a section anywhere within Tacoma that meets that definition, or just even in the slightest. There's no place in Seattle. However, that doesn't mean that that's always been the case. Back a long time ago, in the area that now is the port in Seattle, used to basically be a shanty village. Most of the people who came here were people who were kind of like pioneers, right? And we're talking not that long ago where you had large sections where there were poor people who were living right there by the port because the port didn't really exist in the size and format that it is today. And they were living in pretty much these little tin huts that they threw together. Okay? So you had a lot of people that lived there, and the city would try to shut that stuff down back a long time ago, and they would pop back up. There's this term that people talk about called Okies, and these were people from Oklahoma, mostly white people who progressively moved from because again, obviously, a lot of people came through Ellis Island and that type of thing, so they moved from the Midwest over what is truly the Midwest. They moved from there all the way over to California and Oregon and Washington. And so a lot of those people didn't really have a whole lot of money. And people kind of looked down upon them, a lot of the West Coasters, even though the people who lived on the West Coast at the time it's not like they had been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, but they looked at these people as, basically a bunch of farmers. So a lot of folks settled within Seattle right there because it was close to where all the activity was. But they had a lot of these little shanty villages. Well, eventually the city destroyed all of that and cleared it out. And so when we look at the result of that, with them knocking this down, and we're talking in the 30s, there are people alive today that can still remember seeing that. Okay? Seattle has drastically changed in 80 years. I mean, a lot of cities have, but we're talking drastically. And even Tacoma. These were, if you go back, some people's, like my mom, was born in 1932. If you go to 1940, hold on a second. All right, I'm back. I had to go get a package that was delivered. Noe is here. She's off work because she's starting her holiday, but she's just zonked out. So I thought she got that, but they were dropping off a package and wanted to make sure that we got it. Because again, package theft is a big issue, not only here, but all over the country. That's not what this video is about. But anyhow, so there are people who are alive who can remember this. People like my mom, if she was in this area, she would remember these little shanty villages that existed down. I mean, literally, there's photos of this, and it continued. It started off small and got very large, and even though the city would come through and knock it down, it would still come back, and eventually they solved the problem. And one of those ways was by creating the housing authority and finding a location for people to have affordable housing. Okay? Now, when we fast forward a little bit, in 1940, Yesler Terrace was pretty much created. It was close to downtown, but it wasn't right in downtown. I think Seattle, like a lot of cities, didn't want for people who came here, as far as businesses and tourists and whatnot, they didn't want folks to just instantly see poverty everywhere. They didn't want that. So they knew that a lot of the activity and businesses and all of that opportunities were close to downtown. Keep in mind, what you see today in Seattle didn't exist back in the day, as far as just the spread. Wasn't like that. You can even see pictures of Smith Tower, which is an iconic tower here. It was the tallest tower on the West Coast at one point. But you can see the image of that, and you can see a vision of the shanty village that was right out there by the port. You could see it, right? This was before the push to close all of that down. Well, Yesler Terrace was one of those places that the city decided to invest in back in the 40s. And when you look at Yesler Terrace back in the day, it wasn't all that. It really and truly had a lot of two-story apartment buildings that you currently kind of see, typical that you see today. But even prior to that, some of those buildings were just gross. So the city really invested in that, and there was a lot of old properties that they invested in. It was just a lot easier. They invested in those to just refurb them and make them look better. It was better for people to live in these old apartment buildings that were really, really old. It was better for the city to go in and fix those up and make them look better and have some sort of housing standard, as opposed to people building their own house out of scrap material. So the city did that, and they started really investing in that, and so they felt like this would be a great opportunity because you're close to downtown with Yesler Terrace, but you're not right exactly in downtown. You're close to city services and all of the stuff that's needed, but again, you're not blocking the whole idea of building a port and all of that. Well, Yesler Terrace just kind of did its thing until about 2013. So it shows you from the 40s up until really now, not a lot of stuff happened. I mean, yeah, there was some development here and there, but then the city really started to focus on it because obviously housing here is a major, major problem, especially affordable housing. So the city felt like, you know what, we have to really pump investments into this. When you look at Yesler Terrace today, it now has the light rail system running underground. You could technically get onto the light rail system right there in Yesler Terrace. And the streetcar runs right there. So both points, when you really and truly want to connect in Seattle, When you really and truly want to connect by light rail and streetcar, right in that general area is where you can do that. And so Yesler Terrace allows people to be able to get to Chinatown, which is very close. Keep in mind, Chinatown was developing. The International District was developing too back in this day. So the immigrants were kind of relegated over to one particular area, and not far from that, a lot of the poor were relegated to Yesler Terrace. It's just the history. But the city started to really invest in Yesler Terrace, and now you're starting to see developers actually pick up where kind of the city has left off. Not that the city has stopped doing stuff, but the city basically said, look, developers, you have more money that you can put towards a project than what we can do. Here's land that's available. Now, Yesler Terrace is sitting on 30 acres. Now, some of that 30 acres involves infrastructure and parks and blah, 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 blah. So you're really narrowing it down to probably 20 something acres. But they changed a lot of policies, and now you're seeing, instead of having a little over 550 units, which is what they had back in the day, there's now thousands of units that are starting to actually crop up. And the way that they're doing this is through developers. The big thing is, and they're talking about how, the Seattle Housing Authority has added 1,100 additional low-income units a year at Yesler. 1,100 units. Now, it went from 500 and something and stayed at that for decades. Now it's adding 1,100 a year, and the way that they've been able to do it, again, is through developers. Vulcan is one of those. A lot of other big companies here who build buildings, this has been their focus. And because you have two modes of rapid transportation that can get you to downtown or to get you to the International District and technically all the way to the airport if you wanted to, this has been a really hot area, but the city has stressed it has to be affordable. What does affordable means? It means that families cannot earn more than 30% of the median income. And if that's what your income is, you can apply to live there in Yesler Terrace. It really does make everything a bit easier. So when we talk about how expensive it is in Seattle, that's very true. It's very expensive. And I've had people say, well, I make it here and I've only made $40,000 a year. There are people who do it. Absolutely. There are people who are able to do that. But is it the most optimal situation? No, it's not. There's a lot of, it's not comfortable for a lot of people. Some people can make anything work, right? So I get that. But when we're talking about just what you typically are able to expect in the average ease of life, there's a certain amount of money that you should be able to make here in order to really do that fully. And when it comes to housing, there are alternatives. And this is something that really and truly, I think, Tacoma can learn from when it comes to Seattle. So I think that Tacoma can learn from Seattle when it comes to how they've developed Yesler Terrace. And there's a pretty large chunk of land that the city is focused on. I think that Tacoma can learn from that. But I think that Seattle can learn from Tacoma in terms of dealing with how homelessness should be dealt with. I haven't done a video about it, but really and truly, Tacoma has done a tremendous job on dealing with the homeless population. And now they're trying to chip away at the issue in terms of affordable housing and do something similar, but not on the same scale. Now, when you look at Yesler Terrace, we're talking high-rises being developed. Now, if you go through Yesler Terrace now, you'll see buildings. It went from two-story buildings, which they had back in the day, to now you're seeing the typical blocky buildings that is known for Seattle, and now it's filtering down here to, sorry, I spit everywhere. It's now filtering down to Tacoma. These are buildings that are like 4 and 5 stories tall. They're these mid-rise buildings. And so they have all the posh pretty on the outside, and they're just really kind of cool and unique and that type of thing, right? So these structures are starting to go up. But now a developer is wanting to build a high-rise, a huge building right in this area. When you look at the future, and they've shown kind of what to expect from Yesler Terrace in a few years. And if I can find that link in that video, I'm going to put it actually in the description box. They do kind of a fly through of what it's going to look like. It looks pretty much like a downtown. So it went from being just this little piddly, small 2-story apartments that look bad. Okay, on the outside, they just look bad. Then they started to make them kind of look like what you typically see anywhere in terms of those apartments on the outside. They even show women in there, cooking and stuff back in the 30s and 40s and all that stuff, and the decor and everything, and the families and the dad sitting down reading the newspaper. They show you that, right, of what Yesler Terrace used to look like. And then it went from that to the blocky type stuff. Of course, back in between that time, the city started focusing on parks and different things to make that area much more livable, and that people can step out of their home and go to parks. So they didn't have to travel everywhere. Now you have the blocky buildings, but then in the future, which meaning today and beyond, you're now going to see buildings that are much, much taller. Beyond the 5 and 6-story buildings, you're going to see 20-story buildings there. And the rendering truly does look like a downtown. When you look at a good example of this is the Amazon area, right? When you look at Amazon, it looks, if you just could basically clear out downtown and you basically look at South Lake Union plane flying over the military. But if you can look at South Lake Union, it looks very much like a downtown. When you look at Yesler Terrace, it's going to look very much like a downtown of any city that you would see, and it's very clustered. There has been a really strong push by the city to fix that, to fix the issue of affordable housing. Is it enough, though, is the question. And a lot of people are saying no, it's not. Obviously, there's so many people that are moving in, the price of everything is going up, and you're pushing people out. And I've actually discussed about what happens with that, right? Some people are saying, well, why don't you just move? It's not that simple. When people lose their home because of property taxes, and people say, well, you can just sell your home for a lot of money and blah, 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 blah. Well, that's the whole point of gentrification. That's how it happens, is that people can't afford it. They have to leave. And yeah, they sell their home, but it's not as simple. And we have some people, especially this is a syndrome in America, that you don't just give a damn about other people. That's a major problem here in this country. People don't care about their fellow man. They preach it, but they really don't care about their fellow man. So some people don't care if there's social inequities. They don't care. It doesn't affect them. They don't care if economic opportunities aren't happening for other people, but they really care if it happens for them. So for some people to lose their home that they've worked hard for, they've raised a family in, there's a history there. It's not as simple as, well, why don't you just move and go someplace else, right? There are some people who are very entrenched in the area. They should not have to move. And so with something like this, it kind of prevents that from happening. It's kind of Seattle's way of making up for past mistakes when it comes to gentrification and no rules in place. Cities can actually prevent a lot of gentrification if they set up policies and rules to protect those areas, right? They can zone areas and protect certain particular areas, and also make sure that the tax base in those particular areas are actually held, or offer incentives for developers to actually build within the area, to actually find a place for people to actually live in, even if they do have to give up their home, because that a lot of times does happen. But some people don't want to move. In the case of here, if you want to move to find affordability, you're going to have to almost go to the coast, or you're going to have to move kind of out of the entire state. The state of Washington is becoming expensive. I did a video talking about the minimum wage in not only in Seattle and Tacoma, but the state. We have one of the highest ones at $11.50. Starting the first of the year, it's going to be $12 an hour. But the entire state is becoming more and more expensive. So to just say, you should just move, I think is kind of flippant. It's an elementary argument. But anyhow, tell me what you think. I think personally, Yesler Terrace is a very good thing. I think that it's something that Tacoma should really replicate. I think it should also be close to downtown. It shouldn't be far out. One of the things that really doesn't make sense to me with Tacoma is where they actually place things. The Tacoma Community College is pretty much on out of the city almost. That was a stupid location. Now I know that they aren't in charge of the community college, but to me, having it way on the very far end of the city is just stupid. My opinion. And I think that putting the baseball field where it is also equally stupid. It's far away. And then to even get there, if you don't have a vehicle, is still even harder. There were plenty of places close to downtown where they could have actually done that. I could point out places right now that they could actually put a ball field. When we talk about Topgolf hopefully coming to Tacoma, Topgolf is already trying to get into Renton, Washington. And now Tacoma drags its feet. So Renton may have it before we do, if we get it at all. But by the Tacoma Dome, that should be an area where they've actually put in the baseball field. That makes perfect sense to me. You create an area, and then the rest of that could have been used for parking and or even an entertainment zone where you have bars and shops and different things like that. That would have made sense. You have the Tacoma Dome with all the things it brings to it. Then you have the baseball field. It's close to downtown and everything. It's all within the transit area. But they didn't do that. So it's kind of off the beaten path. Now with us getting a soccer specific stadium built right next to the baseball field for the Sounders, they have a minor league soccer team that's coming to Tacoma. Again, it's away from everything. I don't understand it. But anyhow, that's not what this video is about. It's about Yesler Terrace. I think it's a really great idea. I think it's something that they should improve upon. I think it's going to be something that's needed not only there in Seattle, but it should also be done down here in Tacoma. The next video I do does talk about what Tacoma is doing, but again, it's not Yesler Terrace size. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys are having a great day, and until next time, I will see you. Take care.